I saw the calendar invite at 6:47 in the morning while I was still in my robe pouring my second cup of coffee. It wasn't addressed to me. It was forwarded, accidentally, I think, though I'd stopped believing in accidents where my husband is concerned. The meeting title said Quarterly Strategy Review, and the location said the Langham, Pasadena, Suite 812. We don't have a Pasadena office. We've never had a Pasadena office. I set down my coffee. I didn't spill it. I didn't knock anything over. I just set it down, very carefully, on the granite countertop that I had picked out myself 11 years ago when we were renovating the kitchen of the house we built together, in the company we built together, in the life I had apparently been the only one actually living. My name is Mara. I'm 41 years old. For the past 14 years, I have been the co-founder, chief operating officer, and if you ask anyone who actually worked there, the operational backbone of Ashford Lane Hospitality Group, a mid-sized hotel and event management company headquartered in downtown Los Angeles. We own 3 boutique hotels, 2 event venues, and a catering division that I personally built from a side service into a $4.2 million annual revenue stream. My husband, Robert, is the CEO. He gives very good speeches. He has excellent hair. He plays golf with the kind of men who have buildings named after them, and he smiles in a way that makes people feel like they've just been let into something exclusive. I used to love that smile. I used to think it was meant for me. We had been married for 12 years. We had built this company in year 2 of our marriage, on a kitchen table that wasn't even ours. We were renting then, a small apartment in Silver Lake, eating pasta 4 nights a week, staying up until 2 in the morning with spreadsheets and vendor contacts and the particular madness of people who believe they are going to make something real. I handled operations, contracts, staffing, logistics. Robert handled investors, partnerships, public relations. It worked because we worked, or so I believed. The woman's name, the one attached to the calendar invite, the one CC'd on the suite reservation, was Christine. She had joined our company 8 months earlier as Director of Business Development. Robert had hired her while I was in Chicago overseeing the opening of our 3rd property. He'd mentioned her once, briefly, over the phone. Smart girl, good connections, comes from Marriott. I thought nothing of it. We hired smart people with good connections all the time. I thought nothing of a lot of things. The morning I found the calendar invite, I did not call Robert. I did not text him. I did not sit at the kitchen table and cry into my coffee like a woman in a movie who doesn't know what comes next. I opened my laptop. I pulled up our company's shared expense platform, and I started reading. It takes a particular kind of stillness to go through 14 months of expense reports with the specific goal of understanding how badly you have been deceived. I had that stillness. I had learned it over years of due diligence, of vetting vendors, of reading contracts the way a surgeon reads an X-ray, looking not for what's there, but for what shouldn't be. The suite at the Langham wasn't a one-time thing. There had been a suite at the Rosewood in Montecito, a weekend at the Ventana in Big Sur expensed under client entertainment, coastal properties prospecting, a dinner at Providence, $1,400 for 2, coded as BD Team Working Dinner. The BD team, as far as I could tell from the attendance records I also had access to, was not present at that dinner. The BD team was Christine, and Christine alone, and the receipt showed 2 glasses of a 2018 Burgundy that we stocked at our own venues and that Robert had once told me tasted like something worth waiting for. He had apparently decided not to wait for me. I closed the expense platform. I opened a different application, our corporate document management system, the one that stored board meeting minutes, shareholder agreements, amendment filings. I had full administrative access to this system. I had built the folder architecture myself. Robert had always found document management tedious. He was more of a big picture person, he liked to say. I started reading the big picture. What I found, nested in a subfolder labeled Legal Ongoing RH Review, were drafts, amendment drafts. Specifically, a draft amendment to our original shareholder agreement that would shift operational decision-making authority from a joint executive structure to a sole CEO designation. My co-founder title would remain, on paper, on the website, in the press bio that described me as integral to the company's foundational vision. But my voting rights on major decisions would be reduced. My access to certain financial accounts would require a secondary authorization from Robert. There was a signature line at the bottom of the draft with my name on it. I had never seen this document before in my life. The draft was dated 3 months ago. It had been prepared by an outside law firm, not our usual corporate counsel. A different firm, one based in Century City that I had never heard of. The attorney's name was on the letterhead. I wrote it down. Then I wrote down the name of our corporate counsel, Leonard, who had been with us since year 1 and who I suspected had not been shown this document either. I would call Leonard, but not yet. First, I called my sister. My sister Patrice is 4 years older than me and works as a forensic accountant for a firm that handles white-collar litigation. She is the kind of person who brings a notepad to Thanksgiving and who once found a discrepancy in a restaurant bill that the manager said was mathematically impossible. She's also the only person in my life who has never once told me I was lucky to have Robert. She answered on the second ring. "I need you to come over," I said. "Bring your laptop." She was at my door in 40 minutes. I showed her the expense reports. I showed her the amendment drafts. I showed her the calendar invite still sitting open in my browser, like something that had simply forgotten to hide itself. Patrice read everything twice. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, "How much access do you still have?" "All of it," I said. "He never changed my credentials." She looked at me. "He thinks you don't look." "He thinks I'm busy managing what he built," I said. "He forgot I built it with him." We spent the next 4 hours going through everything. Patrice flagged 11 expense line items that met the threshold for potential embezzlement under California law, not small amounts. The total, across 14 months, came to just over $214,000. Some of it was clearly personal. Some of it was more ambiguous, but patterned in a way that, as Patrice put it, would not survive a serious audit. I thought about the board meeting coming up in 3 weeks, the quarterly review where Robert would present, as he always did, a polished slide deck with revenue projections and strategic initiatives and a vision for the company's next chapter. The meeting where he would smile at the board members who liked him and brush past the ones who occasionally asked inconvenient questions. The meeting where I typically sat at the far end of the table and handled anything operational that required actual specifics. I thought about Suite A212 at the Langham in Pasadena. And I made a decision. I called Leonard that evening. I told him I needed a confidential conversation, not as Robert's counsel, but as mine. We had always maintained a technical understanding that Leonard represented the company, not either of us individually, but in practice, Robert had always treated him as his lawyer. I was counting on the fact that Leonard, who was meticulous and old school about fiduciary duty, would not like what I was about to show him. I was right. Leonard was quiet on the phone for almost a full minute after I described what I'd found. Then he said, "Mara, have you spoken to Robert about any of this?" "No," I said. "Don't," he said. He referred me to a colleague who handled shareholder disputes. Her name was Dana, and she had the particular calm of someone who had seen worse and knew exactly what to do. I met her the following morning at her office in Brentwood. I brought everything, printed copies organized by category, date stamped, with Patrice's handwritten notes attached. Dana looked through it. She looked at me. She said, "You know this is going to be complicated." "I know," I said. "You know it's going to touch everything, the marriage, the company, your professional relationships." "I know," I said again. "What do you want?" she asked. Not what do you want to happen to him? What do you want to come out of this? I had been thinking about that question since 6:47 the previous morning. "I want the company," I said. "I want what I built. I want it protected from whatever he was about to do to it." Dana nodded like that was the right answer. Maybe because it was specific. Maybe because it didn't involve anything she'd have to talk me out of. We spent the next 2 weeks in what I can only describe as controlled excavation. Dana worked with Patrice's documentation to build a formal demand package. We engaged a forensic accounting firm, a different one from Patrice's, to maintain independence, to conduct a preliminary review of the flagged expenses. Their findings were, if anything, more detailed than what Patrice had outlined. The $214,000 figure grew. The Century City law firm was identified as having been retained without board authorization, which meant the amendment drafts had been commissioned without proper disclosure to the board. In the meantime, I went to work every day. I sat in meetings. I reviewed vendor contracts. I answered emails about our Q3 event bookings and a plumbing situation at our Santa Barbara property and a staffing dispute in the catering division. I talked to Robert over dinner twice a week, the way we always had. Surface conversation, logistics, the ambient noise of a marriage that had been, for some time, more schedule than relationship. He did not notice anything different about me. He never had been particularly good at noticing me. One evening, about 10 days in, he mentioned that he'd been thinking about restructuring my role. Just streamlining, he said. He was cutting a piece of steak. He didn't look up. The company's at a size now where the COO function makes more sense reporting through the CEO office rather than sitting alongside it. It's just cleaner. I watched him cut his steak. That's interesting, I said. It's not personal, he said. It's structural. Of course, I said. He looked up then, probably because I hadn't pushed back. I think he'd expected some version of an argument, something he could redirect or manage. My agreement seemed to throw him slightly. We can talk through the details whenever you're ready, he said. Absolutely, I said. Let's find a time. We never found a time, because 2 days later, Dania filed a formal notice with our board chair, a woman named Frances who had been on our board since year 3, and who I had always suspected was more perceptive than she let on in meetings, outlining the preliminary findings and requesting an emergency board session. I was on the phone with Frances for 40 minutes that evening. I told her I had not wanted to bring this to her without documentation. I told her I had documentation. I told her I understood this was difficult. Frances said, Mara, how long have you known? 2.5 weeks, I said. And you waited. I needed to be certain, I said. I didn't want to walk into that room with the suspicion. I wanted to walk in with a file. Frances was quiet for a moment. You've always been the one who reads the whole contract, she said. Someone has to, I said. The board session was called for a Tuesday morning. Robert was notified the evening before, standard protocol for emergency sessions which the board bylaws required. He was not told the specific agenda. He was told it was urgent and that his attendance was expected. He called me that night, after he got the notification. Do you know what this is about? He asked. Board matters, I said. Frances didn't say. Frances never calls emergency sessions. I know, I said. He was quiet. I could hear him thinking, or the closest thing to thinking he did when something had slipped outside his control. I'm sure it's fine, he said finally. Probably the Santa Barbara property. We've had a few issues. Probably, I said. I slept fine that night. I don't know why that surprises people when I tell them, but it does. I slept fine because I had done everything I could do. The documents were filed. Dana was prepared. Patrice had provided a sworn affidavit. The forensic accounting report was complete. I had read every word of our original shareholder agreement, our corporate bylaws, every board resolution we had ever passed, every amendment we had legitimately made together. I knew exactly where I stood. I had known for 2 weeks. The knowing, once you accept it, is lighter than the not knowing. It was the not knowing that had been so exhausting. The board meeting began at 9. Robert walked in at 9:02, which was characteristic. He liked to enter a room after it was already assembled. He was wearing the grey suit. He always wore the grey suit when he wanted to project steady authority. He sat at the head of the table as he always did, and he looked around at the board members, and he smiled that smile, and I watched 3 of them not quite smile back. He noticed. I saw it, a flicker, there and gone. Dana was present as my counsel. a second attorney, retained by the board for independence, sat beside Francis. A representative from the forensic accounting firm sat along the wall with a printed report in front of him. Robert looked at the forensic accountant. Then he looked at me. I didn't look away. Frances opened the session. She was precise and measured, the way she always was. No drama, no preamble, just the facts as they had been presented to the board over the prior 48 hours. She outlined the expense irregularities. She outlined the unauthorized legal engagement. She outlined the amendment drafts and the question of whether they had been disclosed to the board in any form at any time. They had not. The board attorney outlined what that meant under our bylaws. Our shareholder agreement had specific provisions about material changes to executive authority, provisions that required full board disclosure and a vote. Preparing amendment documents through outside counsel without notifying the board or the co-founder whose rights were being amended was not a grey area. It was a violation of the agreement. It was arguably a breach of fiduciary duty. It potentially supported a finding of fraud. Robert asked to speak. Francis allowed it. He did what I expected him to do. He contextualized. He minimized. He called the expenses informal client development costs that had been miscoded. He called the amendment drafts a preliminary exploration of structural options, never intended to be executed without full disclosure. He called Christine a key business development resource whose relationship with the company was entirely professional. Francis asked whether the board had been informed of the preliminary exploration. Robert said he had intended to bring it to the board when the thinking was more developed. Francis asked whether I had been informed. There was a pause. We discussed the general concept of restructuring, he said. She had not seen these documents, Francis said. It was not a question. Another pause. Not in this form, he said. Francis looked at the board attorney. The board attorney said something quiet. Francis nodded. Then Francis looked at me, and she said, Mara, do you have anything to add? I had not planned to say very much. Dana had advised me to let the documents do the work, and the documents had done their work beautifully. But I looked at Robert, at the grey suit, at the careful positioning, at the man who had stood in our Silver Lake kitchen at 2 a.m. and promised me we were going to build something real together. And I said, I just want the board to know that I have never once in 14 years made a decision about this company that I wasn't willing to put my name on. I'd like to continue having that standard applied to everyone in this room. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then the vote was called. The board voted to suspend Robert's executive authority pending a full independent audit. They voted to appoint an interim CEO from within the board. They voted to refer the expense findings to outside legal counsel for assessment of civil and criminal exposure. Francis moved through each vote without expression. Robert sat very still. He did not look at me during the votes. He looked at the table, at the window, at some point slightly above the heads of the board members. He looked like a man who had built a very careful architecture around himself and was watching it undergo structural failure in real time. When the session adjourned, he stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He walked out without speaking to anyone. I stayed and answered the board's questions for another 40 minutes. Vendor relationships, operational continuity, the catering division's Q4 pipeline, what we needed to communicate to our staff and when. I had notes. I had been preparing for this part too. After, Francis walked with me to the elevator. She said, Are you all right? I think so, I said. Ask me in a month. She nodded. She pressed the elevator button. Then she said, He used to take credit for things in this room that you had done. I noticed. I should have said something sooner. It's hard to say something, I said, when you're not sure you're seeing it right. You saw it right, she said. The elevator came. I wrote it down alone. The audit took 11 weeks. During those 11 weeks, I ran the company, not as interim CEO. That title went to someone else, someone neutral and temporary. But I ran it the way I had always run it, which is to say I was the one who knew where everything was and what everything meant and who needed to talk to whom. The interim CEO was intelligent and decent and called me without embarrassment at least twice a day. I didn't mind. Robert and I separated formally 8 weeks after the board meeting. He moved into a furnished apartment in Culver City. We communicated through our respective attorneys. He did not contest the company claims, which I was told was partly strategic. Contesting them would have required producing more financial records, and more financial records were not in his interest at the time. He retained a family law attorney for the divorce proceedings. I retained one as well. California is a community property state, and 14 years is a long time, and the negotiations were, as Dana had predicted from the beginning, complicated. But my attorneys had something his attorneys did not: documentation of the company's actual operational history, the contracts I had personally negotiated, the revenue streams I had personally built, the organizational structure that existed because I had designed it. In a divorce where the primary marital asset is a business, it matters who built what. It matters who can prove it. Kristen resigned the same week Robert's suspension was announced. Her resignation letter cited a desire to pursue other opportunities. She'd been with the company 8 months. She'd been paid $340,000 over those 8 months in salary and reimbursed expenses. Our forensic accounting team had opinions about those expenses. Those opinions were included in the civil referral. The criminal referral on the embezzlement question was ultimately resolved without charges through a civil settlement that Robert's attorneys negotiated quietly, and that required him to repay a significant sum to the company. I was told the number. I found it appropriately uncomfortable for him. I never asked about Christine again. I didn't need to know. She had been a component of something he was building that didn't include me, and that something had not survived, and she had moved on to other opportunities, and that was the complete story as far as I was concerned. What I cared about was the company. I was named CEO 6 months after the board meeting, following a formal search process that I participated in along with 2 external candidates. The board's vote was unanimous. Frances called me before the official announcement. "We should have done this years ago," she said. "I wasn't ready years ago," I said, and then, because it was true, or maybe I was and I didn't know it yet. There are things I've had to sit with in the time since. The particular grief of a marriage that ends not in a single dramatic moment, but in the slow revelation that you had been alone in it for longer than you knew. The embarrassment, which I think women especially are not supposed to admit to, but which is real, of having trusted someone completely and been wrong. The strange doubling of grief and relief that comes when the same event represents both a loss and a rescue. I've had to sit with the fact that I did not see it coming, not for a long time, that I had been managing so much, for so many years, that I had forgotten to look at the thing closest to me. That the work of keeping everything functioning had been, in some ways, a way of not looking. I've had to sit with the calendar invite, still vivid, Suite 812. The Langham, Pasadena. The same hotel chain where we'd spent our 3rd anniversary. The same room category I had negotiated a corporate rate for 2 years earlier, in a meeting I'd attended alone because Robert had a golf thing. I think about that sometimes. The rate I negotiated for rooms he used with someone else. And then I think about our Santa Barbara property, which is now fully operational after the plumbing situation was resolved, and our downtown LA venue, which is booked through March, and our catering division, which just secured a contract with a studio in Burbank for their awards season events. A contract that came through a relationship I had built, quietly, over 3 years of returning phone calls and remembering birthdays and doing what I said I would do. I think about those things more than I think about Suite 812. The company is still here. I built it to last. It turns out, and this is the part that took me a while to understand, that I built it to last without him. I just didn't know yet that I had. The thing nobody tells you about being deceived by someone you built something with is that the hardest part isn't the anger. The anger is actually clean. It tells you what to do. The hardest part is the inventory, going back through 14 years and figuring out which moments were real and which ones were performance, and accepting that you may never fully know the difference. I've thought a lot about why Robert thought he could do what he did. Not to understand him, exactly. I stopped needing to understand him somewhere around week 3 of the audit. But because I think the answer says something useful about how these situations develop in the first place. He thought he could do it because I had made myself easy to overlook, not through weakness, through competence. I kept everything running so smoothly that my presence became invisible, the way the foundation of a building is invisible. You don't notice it until something tries to remove it and the whole structure shifts. I had confused being indispensable with being seen. Those are not the same thing. What I know now is that integrity, the actual practice of it, not the self-concept, is doing the documented work even when no one is watching. Every contract I filed, every vendor relationship I maintained, every revenue line I built with my name traceable back to the decision, that wasn't just good operations. It turned out to be a record. It turned out to be evidence. The choices I had made for 14 years because they were the right way to do business became, in the end, the thing that protected me. You cannot manufacture that kind of record in a crisis. You either have it or you don't. Patrice once told me when we were kids that the people who get away with things long-term are rarely the smartest people in the room. They're just the ones who correctly identified who wasn't paying attention. Robert had correctly identified that I was not paying attention to him. I was paying attention to the work. What he miscalculated was that the work and the documentation and the relationships I had built were all still there, waiting, when I finally looked up. There's something I want to say to anyone who is sitting where I was sitting at 6:47 in the morning, reading something they cannot unknow. Don't let the shock make you move fast. Let it make you move carefully. The impulse is to confront, to demand answers, to force the moment. But moments can be managed. Documents can't. A person who has been underestimating you for years is counting on you to act from emotion, because emotion can be redirected. Precision cannot. I'm the CEO of the company I co-founded. The catering division I built is booked through the spring. Frances still calls me when something requires a steady read. My sister brings a notepad to everything, and I have never once told her to stop. The company is still here. I made sure it would outlast the version of my life that tried to erase me from it. That is not revenge. That is just the natural consequence of 14 years of doing the work with your whole name on it. What you build honestly tends to stay.